There is a reason this video found you now, not because you searched, but because something inside you is breaking quietly. Here is the paradox. What if the pain you feel is not failure, but proof that your old self is already dying? Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine standing between who you were and the new you, feeling fear, relief, and exhaustion at once. Buddhist teachings reveal a truth few dare to face. You don't heal by improving the ego. You heal when you destroy the old you, kill that weak version of yourself, and finally disappear and rebuild. Buddhism was never about comfort, it was about freedom. As one truth says, what you cling to is what imprisons you. So ask yourself, are you ready to master your emotions and rebuild yourself, or will you keep chasing who you no longer are? Before we begin, subscribe to Deep Wisdom, where every video is a doorway to calm, clarity, and timeless Buddhist insight you won't find anywhere else. Stay until the end, because a powerful bonus lesson reveals the exact moment your old self quietly disappears. 1. Why we are addicted to our old self. If your old self hurts you, why do you keep returning to it? This is not weakness. This is conditioning. The mind clings to what it knows, even when what it knows is pain. Pain feels safer than the unknown. And so, without realizing it, you keep choosing the familiar wound over the unfamiliar freedom. Identity feeds on familiarity. Your old self is not alive because it is true. It is alive because it is repeated. The same thoughts, the same reactions, the same stories you tell yourself about who you are and what you deserve. Over time, repetition hardens into identity, and identity begins to feel like survival. The Buddha observed that suffering continues not because pain exists, but because attachment exists. You are not attached to pain itself. You are attached to the version of yourself who knows how to survive inside it. Letting go feels like death, not of the body, but of the role you have memorized. The ego is a burning house you refuse to leave because you memorized the furniture. Even as the walls collapse, the mind whispers, "At least I know where everything is." This is why growth feels threatening. Growth requires disorientation, and the ego fears disorientation more than destruction. Close your eyes. Notice how your name, your story, your past all arise automatically, without effort. See how quickly the mind rebuilds the old self. This is not truth. This is habit. And habits feel personal only because they are practiced daily. In modern life, this addiction shows up quietly. You stay in patterns that drain you. You repeat emotional reactions that no longer serve you. You chase productivity, approval, or control. Not because they bring peace, but because without them, you don't know who you are. What part of me am I afraid to outgrow? Who would I be without my old struggles? Is familiarity disguising itself as loyalty? Here is the turning point. The old self does not die through force. It starves through awareness. When you stop feeding it attention, it weakens. When you stop narrating your pain, it loses its voice. When you stop chasing who you were, silence begins to do the work. Buddhist teaching reminds us, what refuses to die is not you. It is your attachment to being someone. The moment you stop protecting the old identity, space opens. And in that space, calm appears without effort. You do not need to destroy your past. You only need to stop mistaking it for home. Build a disciplined mind by noticing, not fighting. Build calm thoughts by choosing awareness over reaction. And remember this, the moment you stop chasing who you were, is the moment life finally meets who you are becoming. We'd love to hear your thoughts. If you're not sure what to say, just type, "My ego ends here." Why you can't step into a new life with an old ego. Why does growth feel blocked no matter how hard you try? You read, you plan, you discipline yourself, yet something invisible holds you back. This resistance is not fate, it is weight. And the weight is not life itself, but the ego you refuse to set down. Expansion requires subtraction. A new life does not arrive by addition. It appears only when something old is released. You cannot carry yesterday into tomorrow and call it progress. Growth is not about becoming more. It is about becoming lighter. The Buddha taught that clinging is the root of suffering. The old ego clings to roles, labels, and wounds because they once kept you safe. But safety is not the same as truth. What protected you before may now be preventing your freedom. Trying to enter a temple while dragging a coffin behind you. This is what transformation feels like when the ego leads. You bow at the gate of change, yet you refuse to let go of the identity you have already outlived. The gate remains narrow, not to punish you, but to teach you simplicity. Imagine standing at a narrow gate. Notice what you must drop to pass through. See how the mind resists releasing what it calls me, status, control, old anger, old pride, old stories of being wronged or superior. The ego whispers that without these, you will disappear. But it is not you that vanishes, it is the burden. In daily life, this shows up as exhaustion. You work harder, yet feel emptier. You chase improvement, yet feel stuck. The mind keeps building on a foundation that was never meant to support your future. This is why effort alone does not liberate. Awareness does. What identity is too heavy to carry forward? What belief has overstayed its welcome? What am I protecting that no longer protects me? Here is the quiet reversal. You do not step into a new life by defeating the ego. You step forward by outgrowing it. When you stop defending who you were, energy returns. When you stop dragging the coffin of the past, your hands become free. Buddhist wisdom reminds us, when the old self starves of attention, silence completes the awakening. The ego does not need to be killed. It needs to be left behind, unfed, uncarried, unclaimed. Build a disciplined mind by choosing release over control. Build calm thoughts by subtracting what no longer serves. And remember this: the life you seek is already waiting, just beyond what you are willing to let go. 3. Recognizing the layers of ego that must die. Why does the ego seem to disappear, then return stronger? You think you have let go, only to find yourself reacting again, defending again, suffering again. This does not mean you failed. It means you reached a deeper layer. The ego does not die once. It sheds skins. Ego dies in stages. Each time awareness grows, the ego changes costume. When one identity loosens, another quietly takes its place. The wounded self becomes the wise self. The fearful self becomes the disciplined self. And still, the voice says, "This is me." What resists death returns in disguise. The Buddha pointed to this subtle truth. The ego is clever. When attacked, it hides. When praised, it expands. When ignored, it waits. This is why force never frees you. Only seeing does. Like peeling an onion, only to realize each layer thought it was the center. You remove anger and find pride. You dissolve pride and find spiritual identity. You release success and find the fear of being unseen. Each layer believed it was the final one. Each was temporary. Watch your thoughts rise and label themselves as me. See how many versions claim ownership. Notice how quickly the mind says, I am improving, I am healed, I am awakened. Even progress becomes possession. Even growth becomes identity. This is the most refined trap, the ego that feels humble, helpful, or enlightened. In daily life, this appears as subtle tension. You need others to recognize your change. You feel disturbed when misunderstood. You cling to being right, even in silence. The ego no longer shouts, it whispers, and whispers are harder to catch. Which ego feels most spiritual, successful, or wounded? Am I attached to being right or being free? What version of me fears becoming irrelevant? Here is the quiet turning point. You are not asked to destroy these layers. You are asked to stop identifying with them. Each time a layer appears, simply bow to it and let it pass. No argument, no agreement. Buddhist teaching reminds us that liberation is not the absence of self-images, but the absence of belief in them. When you stop asking which one is real and begin resting as the watcher, the layers lose their authority. The ego returns only when it is fed. It weakens when seen clearly. It dissolves when left unnamed. And eventually, what remains is not emptiness, but ease. Build a disciplined mind by observing without claiming. Build calm thoughts by allowing identities to rise and fall. And remember this, the ego does not die when you fight it. It dies when you no longer need to be someone at all. The weak self survives on attention. What if the weakest version of you is alive only because you keep feeding it? Not with effort, but with attention. The mind does not ask whether an identity is healthy or harmful. It only follows energy. Whatever you react to, you resurrect. Whatever you explain, defend, or justify, you give breath again. Energy sustains identity. The weak self does not survive because it is powerful. It survives because it is noticed. Each time you replay a hurt, rehearse a fear, or justify an old story, you nourish the version of you that cannot stand on its own. The Buddha observed that the mind becomes what it repeatedly attends to. Attention is not neutral. It is creative. When awareness sleeps, attention flows toward habit, and habit quietly becomes personality. A shadow grows only when you keep turning toward the light behind you. The shadow has no substance. It expands only because you keep looking back. When you turn forward, it collapses without effort. Notice where your emotional energy flows daily. See which identity drinks from it. Watch how quickly the weak self awakens when challenged. It wants to explain, to prove, to be understood, to be seen as right. The moment you feel the urge to react, pause. That pause is power. In daily life, this shows up as exhaustion without progress. You argue in your head. You rehearse conversations that never happen. You replay moments that already ended. And each replay feels like self-protection, but it is self-consumption. What version of me benefits from my reactions? Where does my attention leak most? What happens if I stop explaining myself? Here is the turning point. You do not need to strengthen the mind by control. You strengthen it by redirection. When attention withdraws, the weak self starves, not through violence, but through neglect. Buddhist wisdom reminds us, silence is not emptiness. It is the absence of unnecessary feeding. When you stop reacting, the old self has nothing to live on. When you stop narrating your pain, it cannot survive. This is where discipline becomes gentle. You choose where energy flows. You choose what gets repeated. You choose which identity is allowed to drink from your awareness. Build a disciplined mind by guarding attention. Build calm thoughts by refusing to resurrect what no longer serves. And remember this: the weakest self dies the moment you stop giving it your light. We'd love to hear your thoughts. If you're not sure what to say, just type, "My ego ends here." 5. Why silence is more powerful than self-control. Why does restraint fail, but silence transforms? Because restraint is still a conversation with the ego. Silence ends the dialogue completely. When you restrain yourself, the mind tightens, watches, resists. But when you become silent, the ego is no longer invited to the table. Silence ends battles that discipline keeps fighting. Silence starves the ego. The ego survives on friction, on argument, explanation, reaction. Self-control still gives it attention. Silence gives it none. This is why moments of true quiet feel unfamiliar. They remove the mirror the ego needs to exist. The Buddha taught that liberation arises when craving and aversion are no longer fed. Silence is not withdrawal. It is clarity without commentary. In silence, the mind has nothing to push against, and so it settles naturally. A fire dies not by force, but when fuel is withdrawn. No matter how fierce the flame, it cannot survive without nourishment. Your reactions are the fuel. Your explanations are the fuel. Your inner arguments keep the heat alive. Feel the urge to react. Now, feel what happens when you do nothing. Notice the discomfort that appears first. That discomfort is not danger. It is the ego gasping. It is the old self realizing it is no longer needed. If you stay, the urge fades, and in its place, space opens. In daily life, silence becomes revolutionary. You are misunderstood, and you do not rush to correct. You are provoked, and you do not defend. You feel emotion rise, and you let it pass without naming it. Each time, the ego weakens. Where would silence change my life fastest? Who am I without my reactions? What identity collapses when I remain quiet? Here is the deeper truth. Silence is not passivity, it is mastery. It requires more courage to remain still than to react. Reaction is habit. Silence is choice. Buddhist wisdom reminds us, when the mind stops interfering, insight arises on its own. In silence, you see clearly. In silence, you are no longer performing yourself. The old self, deprived of attention, begins to dissolve. This is how transformation completes itself, not through control, not through force, but through the quiet refusal to feed what no longer serves. Build a disciplined mind by choosing stillness over struggle. Build calm thoughts by letting silence do the work. And remember this: the moment you stop reacting, the old self finally has nowhere left to live. 6. Emotional silence as a graveyard. Why do your old patterns keep resurfacing? Not because they are strong, but because they are remembered with emotion. The mind does not revive the past through memory alone. It revives it through feeling. The past survives only where emotion gives it breath. Emotional silence is a graveyard. Old reactions do not die when you understand them. They die when they are no longer fed. Every emotional response is nourishment. Every replay is a resurrection. Without emotion, the old self has nowhere to stand. The Buddha taught that suffering repeats where feeling is clung to. Pain ends not when the story is solved, but when emotion is no longer attached to the story. Insight may loosen the grip, but silence cuts the root. A battlefield abandoned becomes grass. Where there is no conflict, life does not argue. It simply moves on. The same is true within you. When the inner war is abandoned, the scars no longer demand attention. Recall a past trigger. Observe it without feeding it emotion. Notice how the memory weakens when it is not charged. Without anger, without regret, without justification, the image fades. This is not suppression. This is release. The old self cannot survive neutrality. In everyday life, this changes everything. You remember a failure and feel nothing. You recall a wound and do not tighten. You see an old version of yourself and no longer defend or condemn it. This is not coldness. This is maturity. Which emotion keeps my old self alive? What memory no longer deserves reaction? What happens when I stop revisiting it? Here is the unseen turning point. When emotion withdraws, identity collapses. The old self is not erased, it is buried. And burial is quiet. There is no struggle, only stillness. Buddhist wisdom reminds us, freedom is not forgetting. It is remembering without attachment. When emotion no longer escorts memory, the past loses authority. It cannot command the present. This is where inner peace becomes irreversible. Not because life becomes gentle, but because the old self no longer rises to meet every echo. Build a disciplined mind by allowing emotions to pass unentertained. Build calm thoughts by letting old reactions starve in silence. And remember this, what no longer receives emotion no longer belongs to you. 7. The void phase. Every transformation requires. Why does nothing feel like you anymore? The habits have fallen quiet. The old reactions no longer rise, yet nothing new has taken their place. This can feel unsettling, even frightening. But this is not loss. This is the threshold. Before truth arrives, identity leaves. Every real transformation passes through the void. The mind was trained to define itself by roles, reactions, and desires. When these dissolve, a gap appears. The ego calls this emptiness failure. Wisdom recognizes it as space. The Buddha pointed to this silence as the end of clinging. When the self no longer grasps, it cannot describe itself. And in that inability, suffering pauses. You are not broken, you are unburdened. A forest after fire, silent, blackened, but fertile. To an untrained eye, it looks destroyed. Yet beneath the ash, seeds awaken. The ground has been cleared. Light reaches places it never could before. Sit with the feeling of, I don't know who I am. Notice the peace hidden inside it. Feel how effort relaxes when identity rests. There is no role to defend, no story to maintain, no image to polish. Just breath, awareness, and a quiet steadiness that does not need explanation. In modern life, this phase is often misunderstood. You may feel unmotivated, less reactive, less driven. Others may call it confusion. But what has disappeared is not purpose. It is compulsion. The hunger to prove, to chase, to become is finally resting. Can I stay without replacing the void? Am I rushing to rebuild out of fear? What if emptiness is wisdom? Here is the deeper truth. The void is not waiting for a new self. It is revealing what remains when the false self is gone. What feels like nothing is actually freedom from unnecessary weight. Buddhist wisdom reminds us, peace does not arrive with answers. It arrives when the need for answers dissolves. In this space, awareness becomes your home. You do not need to be someone to exist fully. This is the moment many abandon the path. They mistake stillness for stagnation. But if you stay, something quieter than ambition begins to guide you. Clarity emerges without effort. Direction arises without force. Build a disciplined mind by learning to stay with uncertainty. Build calm thoughts by trusting the pause between lives. And remember this, the void is not the end of who you are. It is the doorway through which truth finally enters. We'd love to hear your thoughts. If you're not sure what to say, just type, "My ego ends here." 8. Destroying the need to be seen. Why does being unseen feel threatening? Because the ego learned to exist through reflection. When no one looks, it wonders if it still matters. Yet what seeks witness is not yet free. The hunger to be seen is the final rope tying the old self to the world. Visibility feeds the ego. Praise strengthens it. Validation sharpens it. Even criticism gives it shape. When attention arrives, the ego wakes up and says, "I'm here." Without an audience, it begins to fade. The Buddha taught that attachment to image is suffering refined. The mind wants confirmation that it exists, that it is progressing, that it is special. But freedom does not announce itself. It moves quietly, without applause. A seed grows underground, unseen, undefeated. No one claps for roots forming in darkness. Yet, without that hidden labor, nothing ever breaks the surface. The deepest work is invisible, and because it is unseen, it is pure. Imagine doing your deepest work with no recognition. Notice what resists. Feel the part of you that wants to be acknowledged. That part is not wrong. It is simply unfinished. It learned to survive through approval, and now it fears irrelevance. But irrelevance to the ego is liberation for the soul. In daily life, this attachment appears as subtle performance. You want your discipline noticed, your silence understood, your growth confirmed. Even spirituality becomes a display. The ego survives by becoming respectable, admirable, even humble. Who am I performing for? What power grows when no one watches? Can I succeed quietly? Here is the reversal few expect. When the need to be seen dissolves, strength multiplies. Your actions become clean. Your choices become direct. There is no energy lost in comparison or explanation. Buddhist wisdom reminds us, the awakened do not seek light. They become still enough for light to pass through. When you stop looking for witnesses, life itself begins to respond differently. Peace arrives without announcement. This is the death of the social self. Not loneliness, but privacy of being. You move without posture. You act without performance. And in that quiet, the old self finally loosens its grip. Build a disciplined mind by practicing anonymity of effort. Build calm thoughts by letting your growth remain unseen. And remember this, what grows without witnesses cannot be taken away. 9. Discipline without identity. What happens when discipline stops being personal? When effort is no longer tied to identity, struggle fades. The mind stops asking, "What does this say about me?" and simply acts. True discipline has no image. It does not seek to appear strong. It functions. Discipline without identity is quiet power. The ego wants effort to mean something, to prove worth, to confirm superiority. When identity leaves action, work becomes clean. You do what needs to be done, then you let it go. The Buddha pointed to right effort as movement without craving. Action guided by clarity, not by self-definition. When the doer dissolves, action becomes precise, unburdened, and consistent. The sun rises daily without announcing strength. It does not compare itself to yesterday. It does not seek witnesses. It appears, fulfills its role, and disappears. This is discipline without ego. Picture acting without narrating it internally. Feel the simplicity. Notice how energy increases when commentary stops. There is no inner applause, no inner criticism, just movement, just presence, just completion. This is why discipline rooted in ego exhausts. while discipline rooted in awareness sustains. In daily life, this changes how you work, train, and relate. You are no longer motivated by becoming someone. You move because movement is appropriate. You rest because rest is needed. The cycle becomes natural, not forced. Can I act without self-definition? What improves when ego leaves effort? Who works when no identity claims credit? Here is the final turning point. When discipline is no longer personal, failure loses its sting. Success loses its grip. Both pass without carving identity. You are free to continue without carrying a story. Buddhist wisdom reminds us, liberation is action without attachment to the actor. When there is effort without ego, calm becomes stable. Progress becomes inevitable. This is the quiet death of the old self. Not dramatic, not visible, but complete. There is no one left to defend, no one left to prove. Only life, moving correctly. Build a disciplined mind by removing self-image from effort. Build calm thoughts by letting action be anonymous. And remember this, when no identity claims the work finally sets you free. The stronger self emerges unannounced. Why does true strength arrive quietly? Because it no longer needs permission. When effort dissolves into presence, there is nothing to announce. Power does not introduce itself. It arrives the moment striving ends and clarity remains. The stronger self does not fight its way forward. It appears when the old self steps aside. When reaction fades, when identity loosens, when silence has done its work, something stable takes its place. Not louder, not sharper, just undeniable. The Buddha taught that real power is freedom from compulsion, the need to prove, to rush, to correct, to dominate. These are signs of weakness refined. Strength is what remains when urgency disappears. Mountains do not shout their height. They do not compare themselves to the plains. They do not demand recognition. They simply stand. Their presence changes weather, direction, and time without effort. Feel yourself grounded, unmoving, calm. Notice the absence of urgency. See how nothing needs to happen for you to be complete. There is no next identity to chase, no role to perfect. The stronger self is not built, it is revealed. In daily life, this strength looks ordinary. You respond slowly, you choose carefully, you speak less, but each word lands. You are not trying to be disciplined, you simply are. You are not trying to be peaceful, peace accompanies you. What strength no longer needs proof? Where has effort turned into presence? Who am I becoming without trying? Here is the final reversal. The stronger self is not ambitious. It does not seek transformation. It does not even call itself strong. It functions with calm precision because nothing inside is pulling it apart. Buddhist wisdom reminds us, when desire for becoming ends, being becomes whole. The old self died chasing. The stronger self lives arriving. This is why no one notices at first. There is no announcement, no dramatic shift, just a quiet consistency that does not break under pressure. Others may feel it before they see it. This is the end of the journey and the beginning of stability. Not enlightenment as an event, but clarity as a way of standing in the world. Build a disciplined mind by honoring silence over speed. Build calm thoughts by trusting the strength that does not hurry. And remember this, the moment you stop trying to become strong is the moment strength finally becomes you. We'd love to hear your thoughts. If you're not sure what to say, just type, "My ego ends here." 11. When you stop chasing yourself, what if everything aligns the moment you stop chasing? Not because life changes, but because you do. Chasing fractures the mind. It creates distance between where you are and where you think you must be. When pursuit ends, alignment begins. Stillness reorganizes the world. Alignment replaces pursuit. The old self was built on effort, comparison, and urgency. It believed becoming was the same as moving faster. But the Buddha showed that peace does not arrive by acceleration. It arrives by stopping the inner chase. A river clears when you stop stirring it. The water was never dirty. Your movement made it so. In the same way, your mind was never broken. Constant striving kept it cloudy. When effort relaxes, clarity returns on its own. Breathe. Let life come toward you. Feel how the body softens when it no longer has to catch up. There is nothing to prove, nothing to outrun. The future does not need to be forced open. It opens when the grip loosens. In daily life, this shift is subtle but total. You stop pushing conversations. You stop manipulating outcomes. You stop demanding certainty. And somehow, the right responses appear. The right timing reveals itself. What am I forcing unnecessarily? What arrives when I release control? Who remains when pursuit ends? Here is the turning point. When you stop chasing yourself, you stop splitting in two. There is no ideal version ahead of you, no flawed version behind you, only presence, whole and sufficient. Buddhist wisdom reminds us, the end of craving is the beginning of peace. When desire to become dissolves, you no longer miss your life while living it. This is where the old self finally dies. Not through struggle, but through irrelevance. There is no role left for it to play, no tension left to manage. The chase that sustained it has ended. What remains is alignment. Action flows without strain. Discipline happens without effort. Silence supports every movement. You are no longer searching for yourself. You are available to life. Build a disciplined mind by practicing stillness before action. Build calm thoughts by trusting what arises without force. And remember this, the moment you stop chasing who you are supposed to be is the moment you finally arrive as who you are. Bonus lesson. The moment the old self dies. How do you know it's over? Not by fireworks, not by relief. The ending arrives quietly, almost unnoticed. One day, the struggle simply doesn't show up. You wait for it, and it never comes. The death of the old self feels ordinary. No ceremony marks it. No voice announces completion. The habits that once demanded attention lose their urgency. What used to pull you inward now passes without invitation. The Buddha taught that freedom is recognized by what no longer arises. When craving does not appear, there is nothing to suppress. When fear does not speak, there is nothing to silence. Absence becomes the proof. A bell stops ringing when untouched, not because it was destroyed, but because nothing strikes it anymore. The old self ends the same way. No fuel, no contact, no echo. Notice a trigger that no longer triggers. Feel the quiet finality. There is no pride in this moment. No thought says, I am healed. The mind does not record victory. It simply continues, lighter, unburdened. This is how you know the change is real. There is nothing to claim. In daily life, this feels almost anticlimactic. Situations that once controlled you now pass without negotiation. You do not congratulate yourself. You do not explain your calm. You move on. What no longer affects me? What reaction never returned? Who am I now without effort? Here is the final truth. The old self does not die dramatically. It fades through disinterest. When attention no longer circles back, when emotion no longer charges memory, identity loses its anchor. Buddhist wisdom reminds us, awakening is not becoming something new. It is no longer being pulled by what was false. The struggle was never your essence, it was learned. And what is learned can quietly end. This is the deepest peace. Not happiness rising, but suffering not returning. Not clarity appearing, but confusion no longer demanding answers. There is no replacement self waiting to be installed. What remains is simple presence, unforced, unremarkable, complete. Life moves, and you move with it without commentary. Build a disciplined mind by noticing what no longer appears. Build calm thoughts by trusting this quiet completion. And remember this: the old self is truly gone when nothing inside you asks where it went. Quick summary of principles. Why we are addicted to our old self. The old self feels safe because it is familiar, even when it causes pain. Identity creates comfort through repetition, not truth. Attachment keeps suffering alive by calling it me. Freedom begins when familiarity is questioned. Why you can't step into a new life with an old ego. A new life requires space that the old ego occupies. Growth fails when identity is carried forward unchanged. Transformation demands release, not accumulation. What you refuse to drop becomes your limitation. Recognizing the layers of ego that must die. The ego does not disappear all at once. It sheds layers through awareness and honesty. Each layer resists by claiming importance. Seeing through it weakens its hold. The weak self survives on attention. The weakest version of you feeds on emotional focus. Reaction strengthens identity patterns. Attention gives life to habits that should end. Withdrawal begins the collapse of the old self. Why silence is more powerful than self-control. Control fights the ego, silence dissolves it. Silence removes the need to defend or prove. Without reaction, identity loses energy. True mastery begins where explanation ends. Emotional silence as a graveyard. Old reactions persist only through emotional replay. When emotion is removed, patterns weaken naturally. Silence prevents the past from renewing itself. What is not felt deeply cannot survive long. The void phase. Every transformation requires. Loss of identity creates discomfort and confusion. This emptiness is not failure, but transition. Meaning dissolves before clarity forms. Staying present allows rebuilding to begin correctly. Destroying the need to be seen. The need for validation strengthens ego dependence. Visibility feeds identity more than growth. True development happens away from attention. Power matures when recognition is no longer required. Discipline without identity. Discipline works best when it is impersonal. Action becomes cleaner without self-image attached. Consistency strengthens awareness, not ego. Effort flows naturally when identity steps aside. The stronger self emerges unannounced. Real strength is felt, not displayed. It grows quietly through presence and stability. There is no urgency to prove or compare. Power becomes calm when it is rooted in awareness. When you stop chasing yourself, pursuit reinforces the idea of lack. Stillness allows alignment to occur naturally. Life organizes itself when force is removed. Peace replaces effort when chasing ends. Bonus: the moment the old self dies. The end of the old self feels simple, not dramatic. Triggers lose their emotional charge. Struggle quietly disappears. What remains is clarity without effort. The old self does not collapse through struggle. It dissolves through understanding. When you stop feeding identity with attention, emotion, and explanation, it naturally weakens. Zen teaches that liberation is not found by becoming more, but by ceasing to cling. As one timeless insight reminds us, when nothing is held, nothing can bind you. Do not rush to replace who you were. Sit with the silence that follows release. In that quiet, awareness reorganizes your life without force. Carry this question with you today. What part of me survives only because I keep returning to it? If this reflection resonated with you, like and share this video. Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe to Deep Wisdom for more inspiring Buddhist insights on living a peaceful life.